With the rise of AI, it can be a helpful tool and it can be a helpful resources for students and teachers to use. But still, schools are very much scared to actually integrate this, thinking that it will be a cheating system for students, but we say this is problematic for two reasons. Firstly, the lack of AI literacy. People are going to receive and use AI as it is, without actually thinking critically and only getting the information without actually thinking whether or not this is right or wrong. With the rise of AI itself, there also comes with the rise of responsibility in the education system. How they are supposed to teach for future generations how to use AI properly, how to use AI wisely, and we believe that this is the only way to do it. But then secondly, inefficient education system. Teachers, staff, administrations, and etc. in the status quo focus their efforts on mundane things like grading for example, or class schedules for example, and etc. But they can actually focus on primary issues like critical thinking in students for example, or teaching how to teach efficiently. But now they're able to do this with the help of AI. But points of framing to make this a bit clearer. Firstly, how are we going to integrate this AI? AI on the very basis would look like ChatGPT for example, Gemini, DeepSeek, and etc. that we are going to adopt significantly in the education system. This is not going to be optional in classes or schools, but we're going to make this mandatory for every schools, and we're going to make this a central part in our learning, in our administration, and works and teachers as well. We're going to integrate this into classes to actually help students, and maybe teachers will use it, or like the whole education system will use it. Administration will also use it to make them more efficient, and calculating data of students for example. This is only going to be a productive resources that will be used by the whole education system. But disclaimer: we're not going to replace these teachers or like staffs, but we're going to actually teach these students how to use it mindfully, how to use it with critical thinking, so they're able to define what is right or wrong in this world, or able to define what is right or wrong in this ChatGPT, for example, so they can go with their professional careers and become a productive member of society. But two points to prove here. Firstly, how this will create a generation with AI literacy and why it's important. But then secondly, how this will create efficiency for the education system. Moving on to the first argument of proposition. Firstly, about how this will create students that have AI literacy. Let's contextualize what is the responsibility of education. Education itself and education institutions and education systems are there to help these individuals to be a productive member of society, where they are able to define what is correct and what is wrong in this world, whether or not this is good for the betterment of society, and whether or not this is good for the betterment of individuals itself. And yes, education system as well have the responsibility to teach them academically, but we believe that this is just as important to do so students can be mindful, so they're able to go with their future careers, for example, and actually be a productive member of society. But then let's look at the status quo. With the rapid rise of AI, where AI is almost everywhere and everyone can actually access this if they have a phone or like internet, for example. This is something that we cannot deny. The rise of AI is something that we cannot deny. It's already integrated in work, for example, but now we're going to integrate this in the education system. But also, what we cannot deny is that students will use it regardless, whether or not we will integrate this. But the difference on both sides is that opposition students will most likely not use AI mindfully, because they condemn this and trying to use it for the education system. They're not trying to teach these students how to do it properly. Most students will most likely, under side opposition, will use AI to cheat for their homework, for example, or like plagiarize work that they saw on ChatGPT, for example. And this, when we believe that this is not their fault, this is the fault of opposition. This is the fault of opposition, because they're not actually teaching these individuals to use AI properly. But then let's look at proposition. When when we integrate AI and we're going to adopt AI itself, we are able to teach our students how to use it properly, how to use it properly, and how to use it mindfully, or like how to define whether or not this is right or wrong to do, and etc. But how are we going to do this? Is that we're going to in our classes, for example, we're going to teach our students how to do a wiseful prompt, for example. We're going to teach them reasonings as to why you shouldn't use this for homework, for example, or use this for test answers, and etc. We're going to teach our students how to ask ChatGPT to search articles that can be used for research, and not actually do it for plagiarism. And most likely individuals and students under our side of the house will adopt this sense of right or wrong. Will adopt this sense of right or wrong under our side of the house, which will then prevent this kind of cheating under our side of the house, and will prevent this kind of using AI not mindfully. This will prevent cheating under our side of the house, which we say is going to be worse under side opposition, because they're going to use it, and because they're going to use it anyway, regardless if we make it an integration. And we believe this kind of AI literacy is so important, because we did it with digital literacy, for example, but because now digital literacy, for example, or like how these students perceive this media, perceive social media, whether or not they should believe a hoax, for example, but we believe that we should be able to do this with the rise of AI, for these future generations, to use it for work, for example, to use it to work, for example, or like professionally, and we say this is going to be better on side up proposition. But moving on to my second argument then, about how this will create efficiency for education institutions. Firstly, how hard has it actually been for these education institutions and educational teachers? Teachers, staff, administrations, etc. go above and beyond and go exhausted in trying to accumulate students' data, for example, or like teachers making tests or like questions, for example, focusing most of their resources here to actually make this kind of test or like calculate data, for example, making them unable to focus on this primary issue that is coming under both sides of the house. For example, students will have to focus on critical thinking or like have to work hard, for example. But we believe under side proposition, when we're going to use AI, this problem will be fixed. Administration will use it efficiently for calculating data, for example, or teachers can use it to make class schedules or like make test questions, for example, making them able to focus on their teaching styles, for example, to focus on their material, for example, to focus on each individual of students in their classes, for example. We believe that this is important because this will then create room for these teachers as well, create room for these teachers to grow, and create room for the betterment of individuals itself, and the betterment of these individuals itself. This is a resource that we should not condemn, because teachers itself has already so much responsibility, but they still have to abide with trying to make a great class, for example. Therefore, with AI, we are able to do this. So proud to propose.